Hello everybody, welcome back, and today I want to show you all how to do a moveset swap tech. Now this tech allows you to swap virtually any attack onto any weapon, so R1s, R2s, and Ashes of War. Before I show this new tech, I'd like to quickly go over the two most commonly used ways to swap movesets that are already somewhat widely used and known about. The first and least attractive option is Bolus Swap. The main pro with Bolus Swap being that it's somewhat easy to do. Some of its shortcomings on the other hand include the fact that it's only a 2-frame window, which means you cannot hard swap your weapon, you can only unequip, it's fairly inconsistent, and it's pretty telegraphed. Another con for Bolus Swap is that you're also limited to only swapping Ashes of War. You cannot swap R1s or R2s. Having that 2-frame window to unequip rather than being able to swap your weapon also means that there are less Ash of War swaps that'll work. Now, what do I mean by Bolus Swap being inconsistent? Well, as previously mentioned, there are 2 frames that you can unequip your weapon on. Essentially, what's happening is you're queuing the weapon art, and then there's a 2-frame window after the Bolus animation ends that you can unequip your weapon before the attack gets started. And the tricky part about this is that if you unequip your weapon on the first possible frame, it will not work. It'll simply activate the weapon art of the new weapon. So you must unequip on the second frame of the opening in order for it to work. This leaves you with plenty of times where you'll be trying to do a Bolus Swap and you'll just unequip your weapon and do the normal weapon art. Moving on to the second moveset swap option, we have the Backstep Swap, and this one has become rather infamous. But the Backstep Swap has more uses than just chainsawing people. The Backstep Swap is a step up from Bolus Swap in terms of both usability and difficulty. The main pro of Backstep Swap being that the window is now large enough that you can swap your weapon. This allows you to swap R1s, R2s, and Ashes of War. But there is a catch however, you can only swap backstep R1s rather than regular neutral R1s, and needing to do a backstep may not be the most optimal movement. Alrighty, now that you have a basic understanding of the main 2 moveset swaps that already exist, onto the new tech. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out to Psycry, who initially discovered the concept for this tech. I will show you their version of it first, and then I'll show you a variation of it which I discovered. This tech is loosely based around something called Pivot Swap, which was initially discovered in Dark Souls 3 and persisted into Elden Ring. However, pivot swaps with Ashes of War have since been patched out. Pivot swaps relied on being able to access your inventory during the pivoting or locking on animation. However, now you can see the inventory screen is inaccessible during this lock-on animation. Here's where the solution comes in. If you eat a bolus before locking on, you can see now the inventory screen is accessible during this animation once again. Okay, so how does this allow us to swap Ashes of War and other attacks? All you need to do is use a bolus or do an animation that has the same properties as using the bolus. Two-ending your weapon or trying to use an empty heal flask also have that 2-frame window at the end of the animation, so they'll work as well. After you use the bolus, you lock on, then press L2, R1, or R2, depending on which attack you're wanting to swap, and open your menu. Keeping in mind that you need to be somewhat quick with this, because you need to enter your menu before the pivot animation is completed, or else you'll be locked out of the inventory. Then you have the remaining time of the bolus animation to complete and get to that 2-frame window to navigate your inventory and get to the weapon that you want to swap the attack to. At this point, all it comes down to is getting the correct timing to select the new weapon on the second frame of that window from the bolus animation. Unfortunately, I haven't discovered an exact science to this timing, which leads to some inconsistencies. I found the most success with simply spamming the select button around the time that I know the animation is going to end. A side note for swapping R2s in particular is that they require you to hold R2 after completing the swap and charge them fully in order to get the modified moveset. This same thing applies when swapping R2s using Backstep Swap as well. Now onto the variation which I discovered. Some of the pros of this version and why it's my preferred method include being much faster and less telegraphed, and more consistent if you're fast enough. Full disclosure about this version, it is quite difficult. You need to be very quick with your inputs, so it will definitely require some practice. One thing that I find helpful is using a different button besides R3 to lock on. Personally, I use the share button. I believe you can use any consumable that allows you to lock on and have that window open during the animation. For this method, we're simply using the consumable to open our menu during that pivot animation. It's the same inputs as before, but we're going to swap our weapon before the pivot animation ends. Since we're now using the consumables to unlock our menu during the pivot, and they don't have that 2-frame window, we need to make sure that animation completes by the time the pivot is done. So in some cases, that means waiting a little while after using the consumable before going for the swap, depending on the duration of the animation. Personally, I like to use a bundle or do the 2-ending animation, as they are both very quick and I don't find I need to delay at all before going for the swap. An important thing to note for these moveset swaps is that they will desync for other players. So for example, if you were to swap a dagger R1 onto an ultra greatsword, the other player would still see the normal R1 attack of the ultra greatsword, but they would get hit much earlier than the attack comes out on their screen. So they're taking damage and getting hit before they can even react to it. So that's about it for how this moveset swap tech is done. There's quite a bit of potential here with different combos and pseudo-combo roll catches that you can do with swapping movesets. So I'm sure there's lots more that can be discovered in the future, but for now, I'll let some clips play out with some of the cooler combos that I found while testing. I appreciate you all watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.